Well, many of you are wondering, where did Vince find this guy and what the heck does he know about business, let alone the title business? Well, as Vince mentioned, we met several years ago in my previous incarnation as the Chief of Staff of United States Central Command, where I led a staff of roughly 5,200 people for a geographic combatant command responsible for the volatile area of the Middle East and the 20 countries that provide 90% of the world's problems to us. Vince and I were talking about some of the changes that were looming in the title business, and I sarcastically said to him, as I am frequently prone to do, "Hey Vince, in my business, if you don't like the situation, pick a miscreant country, Syria, Egypt, Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and wait 5 minutes and the situation will change." In fact, across my 40-year career in the Army, the only constant that I have ever known is change. Vince replied back to me, "Hey, Karl." Actually, he said, "Hey, General," to which I corrected him. He said, "Hey, what are you doing on the 13th of November about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and can you come and talk to some people about change?" And I said, "Sure." Now, I'm not clairvoyant, and I don't have the Exmo app on right now, but I'm reading some of your minds, and you're saying, how does a guy with 40 years as a soldier understand anything about business, let alone the title business? Well, I'm here to assure you I did not stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night. I actually live in South Tampa. And my childhood friend and next-door neighbor, his dad owned a title company, and my mother worked as a title officer for many years, so there you have it. As I gathered my thoughts on change, I thought of 2 appropriate titles for my presentation. The first one, a little more formal, I said, how about we go with Change Through the Eyes of an American Soldier, a 40-year journey in the evolution of an institution, the United States Army. Or how about Beetle Bailey grows up to be General Half-Track? They're going to get a little of each, okay? So bear with me. Preparation for today also provided me with an opportunity for a nostalgic trip down memory lane and the significant events that I have experienced, not just in my lifetime, but in my life in uniform, because I've spent my entire adult life as a soldier and 2/3 of my natural life doing the same thing. As a student of history, and to fully appreciate change and the long-term impact change has, I believe it's useful to put events into their historical context for several reasons. First, it's important to appreciate events, how they came about, and more importantly, what was the impact or effect of those events. Secondly, for those who do not appreciate the impacts, effects, and mistakes of history, they are doomed to repeat them. To give you a better understanding of the changing color of my lens across 40 years, I'll attempt to translate my military positions and responsibilities to a business lexicon, and then I'll apply those across the changes that I've experienced, that I've lived, seen, and most importantly, that I've influenced. For 35 of my 40 years, I would categorize my job and their responsibilities into essentially 3 bins. I have either been a CEO, a COO, or a chief of staff of an organization. I've been the CEO of organizations as small as 35 members and as large as 56,000 members. I've been the COO of organizations as small as 850 members and as large as 1.2 million men and women in uniform. I've had the privilege of being the chief of staff for a staff as small as 200 and as large as 5,200. And in the extra credit category, and extra credit's important, in the extra credit category, I've held each of those jobs, CEO, COO, and chief of staff in combat. So walk with me for a moment down memory lane and allow me to share the change, some of which is cataclysmic, across my time as a soldier. I have personally experienced being part of an army that was the absolute scourge of society, an institution that was mocked, belittled, scoffed, and spit upon by the very people that we took an oath to support and defend. To an army that rose from the ashes of defeat to become the most formidable fighting force in the history of warfare, and an institution that now enjoys unprecedented public support, approval, and respect. From the bottom to the top, it's been a long and hard journey. I enlisted in the United States Army as a private, Beadle Bailey, on June 22nd, 1973, 10 days after I graduated from high school. That year, President Nixon halted all U.S. offensive operations in Southeast Asia. The peace pact with North Vietnam was signed in Paris. The U.S. withdrew its forces from South Vietnam, and the drafting of military-age men ended. I was wholly and soundly ridiculed by my high school classmates for my decision to enlist in the United States Army. In 1974, as a young private, I witnessed the resignation of the President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief. That's change you can think about. In 1975, North Vietnam broke the peace pact and attacked the Republic of South Vietnam, and we watched Saigon fall on our television sets. Indelibly etched in my mind were the American helicopters evacuating U.S. Embassy personnel off the roof of the embassy compound, and a terrible chapter in American foreign policy and the United States Army's history came to a close. Vietnam decimated our Army, and it took us to absolute rock bottom as an institution. We had only one direction to go, and that was up. Change was desperately needed. In 1979, the United States Embassy in Tehran was stormed, and more than 460 Americans became Iranian revolutionary prisoners. It was a national embarrassment for us all. In 1980, the United States military, led by the Army, failed in a clandestine operation called Desert One to free the American hostages in Iran. The mission failed miserably and became yet again another national embarrassment. This operation was the first of several seminal turning points in the change in the United States military, and I will come back to that as an important point. In 1983, we were again embarrassed on the international stage by the Marine barracks bombing in Beirut, Lebanon, that claimed the lives of 244 Marines. The next month, we were embarrassed yet again by our inept handling of a military operation called Urgent Fury on the tiny island nation of Grenada to free 119 American medical students being held hostage by a third-rate militia that didn't even qualify as an army. At that point, change for our institution was absolutely essential. Essential to our existence as a military that would enable us to defend American interests abroad, because we had failed miserably in our last several challenges. Following the debacles of 1980 and 1983, the Congress directed the leadership of the military, the Army for my part, to enact change that would preclude embarrassing military failures in the future. However, the Department of Defense was and it remains a large bureaucracy that is resistant to change. And each service went about their own unique and independent changes to comply with Congress. Not understanding then, but upon reflection now, I would characterize it as change simply for change's sake. We would say, hey, look, we changed our uniforms from the Vietnam-era green OG 107s to new camouflage battle dress uniforms. That's not change, that's window dressing. But as the former Army Chief of Staff, General Gordon Sullivan, cites in his book, Hope is Not a Method, we needed to change, but we also desperately needed to change the way we changed. We needed to retool and adapt for new missions. We needed to upgrade the skills of our people, and we needed to develop new ways to assimilate and exploit technology to our advantage. In doing these three things simultaneously, we were able to achieve a higher degree of effectiveness than at any other time in our 238-year history. However, the American Congress grew wary of the lack of speed of movement, energy, and enthusiasm inside the Department of Defense to change. And so in 1986, perhaps the most comprehensive and far-reaching piece of legislation ever passed to affect the military was enacted into law, the Goldwater-Nichols Defense Reorganization Act. The key element of the law compelled all of the services to work together, to train together, and to fight together as a joint force. This came about as a direct result of the inability of the services to work together as manifested in the failures of Desert One in 1980 and the embarrassment of Urgent Fury in Grenada, where Army radios couldn't even talk to Navy and Air Force radios, and the forces on the ground used pay telephones to communicate. You can't make this stuff up, ladies and gentlemen. Pay telephones. As a young captain, I was serving as the COO of an 850-man infantry battalion, and I vividly remember my first reaction to the law. And I'll clean it up a little bit because we're in mixed company, but it went something like this. There's no way in hell that I'm ever going to be part of this insane change that will make us all work together. I specifically joined the Army so that I wouldn't have to deal with the Navy. If I wanted to hang out with sailor boys, or Air Force pukes, or God forbid, Marines, I would have not joined the United States Army. No way, Jose, I am not in this joint thing. This was not change that I intellectually understood, believed in, nor was I interested in facilitating this kind of nonsense. Wow, oh wow, was I ever wrong about those thoughts. Unbeknownst to me at the time, but what I grew to fully appreciate and support was the significance of this cataclysmic change and how it altered the inefficient and ineffective Department of Defense and inept individual services, my own, the United States Army, being at the center of it. So from 1986 to 1989, we accelerated change, and we embraced the notion of jointness and the realization that we would never fight our nation's wars as anything other than a joint and fully integrated, interoperable fighting force. The year 1989 also served as a seminal year for both cataclysmic change and significant challenge. Challenge to our military presence, our reputation, to our very essence. We heard President Reagan challenge President Gorbachev, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall. And in November of 1989, the Berlin Wall came down and effectively served as the harbinger to the end of the Cold War. A war that we had been engaged in for 40 years. We had organized the entire United States Army to fight the Russians in Europe. And now they were gone. Change had to come. Change was essential. The next month, December 1989, 20th of December, everybody's getting ready for Christmas, except for those paratroopers in the 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, where we saw the first challenge to the United States military abilities in Panama. Operation Just Cause, the joint forces of the U.S. military toppled the military dictatorship of General Manuel Noriega, who was systematically intimidating and harassing U.S. citizens in Panama. General Noriega's point of reference was the dismal performance of the United States military in Grenada. The mistake that General Noriega made was that he failed to appreciate, he failed to understand the change that was underway in the United States military. And it was a very, very bad mistake for old Pineapple Head. In a matter of days, the United States military simultaneously took down multiple targets using combat forces from all four services operating synergistically to create one effect: defeat of General Manuel Noriega. Just cause was over quickly, efficiently, and effectively, and the world was amazed. The truth of the matter is, those of us in uniform were amazed as well. Stuff really worked. We, as an institution, were back. Another brutal dictator failed to appreciate recent history and the changes underway in the U.S. military. So in August of 1990, Saddam Hussein threw down the gauntlet by invading Kuwait. I remember it vividly. I was the COO of an 850-man airborne battalion in the 82nd Airborne Division. And within 36 hours of that invasion, I found myself in Saudi Arabia as the speed bumps defending the Saudi Arabian peninsula and the vast oil fields of the eastern province. Saddam also underestimated the United States and our ability to build combat power half a world away. Most all of you remember shock and awe of the bombing campaign that launched in January of 1991 and the ground offensive in February known as Desert Storm that lasted just 100 hours to defeat the world's fourth largest army. It was led by General Norman Schwarzkopf, the commander of U.S. Central Command, based at MacDill Air Force Base here in Tampa. In the span of 10 short years, we went from the ashes of Vietnam, the ineptitude of Desert One and Urgent Fury in Grenada, to two major fights, joint fights, with amazing results. Why? Because we became agents of change. And we transformed our military from what it had decayed to at the end of Vietnam to an overwhelming, dominant military force. Here is another significant change that occurred. The army that was reviled, scorned, and disrespected became an army of immense pride in 1991. My high school classmates started reaching out to me to thank me and congratulate me for my part in the recent victory and military accomplishments. Change comes in odd ways. Following Desert Storm, the massive combined arms maneuver war of the Arabian Desert, my army saw more change in 1992 with the Bosnian Civil War. And so an army that was organized to defeat the Russians in Europe, that changed to defeat the Iraqis in the Middle East, now found itself in another new and unique situation that required change and adaptation. Now as peacekeepers in the Balkans, then as peacekeepers in Somalia, and peacekeepers in Haiti. How do you adapt from full-scale maneuver combat to standing between warring factions? It is a dramatically different skill set. There's no need to review in detail the single most significant life-altering event of our natural lives, the events that occurred on September 11th of 2011. They forever changed the way we viewed the world, and they forever changed our lives. The essence of our nation and our American culture, our freedom, was fundamentally and inextricably altered. War came to America, and the events that followed galvanized us as a nation. We could spend a week describing the changes that each and every one of us have experienced as a result of that day. No one in this room has been unaffected by 9/11. Everyone in this room knows someone who has served and or someone who has been killed in either Iraq or Afghanistan. For my part, as a soldier, we had to again adapt and change our Army. As the Chief of Staff of the 82nd Airborne Division, within 30 days of 9/11, we deployed forces to Afghanistan for a new old way of fighting. I call it back to the future, counterinsurgency operations, just as in our waning days of Vietnam. Then came the call for an invasion force to liberate Iraq from the same despot that we had faced in 1990 and 1991. Yet again another change, now back to the combined arms maneuver warfare in the desert. And as this mission came to a successful end, we turned on a dime to a whole-scale fight against a determined ethno-sectarian insurgency. We have now seen that fight turn from counterinsurgency to a train, advise, and assist mission, similar again to those waning days of Vietnam. Remember, for those of you that don't learn the lessons of history, we are doomed to repeat them. Today, I see us on a perilous path in Afghanistan that stands to repeat the mistakes of Iraq, putting Afghanistan gains and sacrifices on what can be a reversible glide slope right now. And I'm happy to address any of those in a question-answer period, and we'll come back to that. But before I shift gears, I do have one important vignette that I want to share with you. Contrasting when I was a captain, resistance to change, change in jointness, and to the quality of the captains, young men and women who are serving today, who know nothing but jointness. In 2006, I was the Executive Vice President, the Deputy Commanding General of Multinational Division Baghdad. And I was monitoring a fight going on one evening in Baghdad. An Army captain was leading a 130-man infantry company and was engaged in a pretty hot fight in the northern parts of Baghdad. And I was listening to the captain on the ground talk to another captain leading a two-ship flight of Apache attack helicopters that was providing some additional firepower to the captain on the ground. As the two captains were discussing the target set, the Apache pilot mentioned he was having a hard time seeing the target. And out of nowhere came a voice, like God. This voice came, and this call sign came up on the net. It was an Air Force captain leading a two-ship flight of F-15 Strike Eagles, who calmly said, "No problem, brothers. I have a visual on the target set, and I'll take it from here." Now, you have three captains, two different services, talking to each other in this particular fight. The F-15 pilot reports he's low on fuel, and he's going to break station and head for an aerial refueler. And when yet another voice from God comes on the net, and a call sign enters the fray, and this is a Navy lieutenant leading a two-ship flight of F-15 Super Hornets, who said, "No problem. I'll remain on station as long as possible until this fight comes to an end." As I'm listening to two Army captains, an Air Force captain and a Navy lieutenant, seamlessly prosecute a combined arms joint fight all on their own, as if it were second nature to them, I thought to myself, we have come a long way since 1983 and Grenada, with generals and admirals talking on payphones, trying to make things happen. The truth of the matter is, ladies and gentlemen, it was, in fact, second nature for those young captains, because it was what we had taught them. We, the agents of change, had trained them to be joint warfighters. Oh, and remember my classmates who had scorned me when I enlisted? The class of 2005 from my high schools selected me as that year's distinguished alumnus. From scorn and ridicule to distinguished alumnus. I didn't do anything. I just served. With that distinction came the responsibility of delivering the commencement address. There was only one problem. I was in Baghdad, and they were in Washington State, 10 time zones away. But the solution was easy. Skype on an iPhone. Mission accomplished. No problem. Couldn't have done that in 1973. Okay, we're talking about change. I spent a long time talking about retooling an organization to accommodate the changes brought about by an evolving geopolitical environment that drove new missions, new requirements, and the new need for capabilities. Inherent in leading change is upgrading the skills, problem-solving abilities of the people inside your organization. If you or your company are not a learning organization, then your ability to lead change or to be an agent of change is extremely difficult. Professional development and professional interaction at such things as this convention help to broaden your aperture for learning new methods and procedures to understand, accommodate, and to lead change. Decisive in leading change is assimilating and exploiting technology in your workplace and with your people. And I thought I'd have a little fun today, and because I'm retired and I can have fun now, I brought a few things for show and tell to illustrate my points about technology. My hypothesis is this: if you do not understand, embrace, or evolve with change, you will rapidly become obsolete. Once you become obsolete, you will then become irrelevant. And when you become irrelevant, you will cease to function, and then you will cease to exist. That's my hypothesis, and now I'll prove it. Debbie Lundberg helped me out. I brought 3 training aids. Debbie brought me 1 just to add to the fun. So in 1973, when I graduated from high school, my parents gave me a graduation gift, and it was something kind of like this. It was just a little bit bigger. It was an adding machine, okay? It did add, subtract, divide, multiply, turn on, and turn off, okay? That was it. In 1974, when I started my freshman year of college in an academic environment, I had this as my computer. All right, I'm going to hold this up. How many of you recognize what this is? Okay, for those of you that have your hands up, how many of you know how to use it still? Okay. All right, there is a test for you in the back of the room. Okay? When I started my freshman year of college, in this curriculum that would give me a Bachelor of Science degree in engineering, this was my personal computer. That was it. This was as good as it got. It was cutting edge of technology. Our computers were actually monstrous Honeywell mainframe machines that ran on programs called Fortran and COBOL. The system required us to feed data processing cards into the machine that ate them and produced printouts of results. And it took up almost 1,000 square feet to do its job. How many of you recognize this device? This is a Texas Instrument TI-83. 8 standard deviations more advanced than the one that was issued to me my sophomore year of college. And it did cool things like compute sine, cosine, and tangents. And this made things a little bit better. But there was no change to that mainframe monster eating the data cards. How many of you recognize this? Certainly you do. In fact, I'll bet, and with Debbie's coaxing, every one of you sitting out there has one of these, okay? This is an iPhone 5. I got it last year. There's already a newer version out beyond this one. Similarly, Apple's competition, is working hard to get ahead and increase market share with their new Gee-Whiz versions. Samsung's out there, and I actually saw several of you out there that have Blackberries. They're still out there. Give them up. It's time to go. Change is inevitable. If you've got a Blackberry and that guy sitting next to me back there, when it rang, you gave yourself away, dude. On a very serious note, this iPhone right here has more memory and more capability than the 1,000-square-foot Honeywell mainframe from my college days. In fact, I went to the App Store last night just to check and see if I could download a multivariable calculus app to my iPhone. Raise your hand if you think that I was successful in finding one. You better believe it. For $2.99, you can get a multivariable calculus app for your iPhone. How many of you know what a lensatic compass is? Okay. Well, a lensatic compass is kind of like one of these. Okay? It's a little device that has a north-seeking arrow, and what it did is it told us what direction we were traveling. When I was a young lieutenant, we all had one, along with a 1 to 50,000 scale paper analog map. And we had those so that we could navigate and we could lead our soldiers in combat. Lensatic compass and a paper map. If you didn't know how to use either one of those, you had no hope of being successful as a leader. My iPhone has an app for a lensatic compass, which I now find cute and entertaining, but not relevant. It also has GPS, Google Earth, MapQuest, and a bunch of other things that I use every day to help me navigate life. So had I not grasped, embraced, and evolved with changing technology, I would still be standing here computing sine and cosine with my slide rule. But I did evolve. I did evolve. And so now I have this, my iPhone, and I'm telling you, I'm only giving it up when I'm dead and my rigor mortis hands and fingers are pried away from it, or a newer model comes out, like already has. Indulge me one more story to support my hypothesis. Several years ago, when I was the COO of a 1.2 million man and woman force, my boss, the CEO, wanted to expose us to the business world. And he wanted to expose the business world to us, the executive staff. We flew to Seattle, and we spent 3 days on the Microsoft campus in Redmond with all of the big brain people working for then CEO Steve Ballmer. At the time, Microsoft was the alpha in technology. There were no iPhones yet. And so Microsoft remained supreme and the cutting edge of everything. Most all of us owned PCs running Microsoft operating systems, and so we thought we were really at Mecca when we got to Redmond and the Microsoft campus. Our CEO directed that each of us would pose a thoughtful question to Steve Ballmer in our final closeout session with him. And as we worked our way around the room with our insightful questions, it came my turn. Here was my question. Steve, and oh, by the way, he did not like to be called Mr. Ballmer. He liked to be called Steve. West Coast cool, Steve. Okay, I go by Karl. Steve, as the CEO of this company, what keeps you awake at night? That was my question. His answer was interesting. And he said, I worry about our competitors' ability to accommodate change in technology faster than we can accommodate change. And I worry about them gaining the market share over us, reducing our market share. Anybody check the stock this morning? Okay. Where's Apple? Where's Microsoft? Steve's had a lot of sleepless nights in Seattle in the last couple of years. Okay? Because Microsoft, in fact, lost that competitive edge. What's this again? It's an iPhone. It's interoperable with my iPad, with my MacBook Air, and my iMac. What's the name of the Microsoft personal data device? I don't even know what the name of it is. Okay? Why? Because the little apple with a bite out of it has stolen the market. Okay? Samsung's after it, but the little apple has taken the market. Why? Because they accommodated change. They accommodated change and technology. Okay, so who disagrees with my hypothesis? Okay, who remembers my hypothesis? So when confronted with change, my question to you is how do you react? Do you accommodate, facilitate, and become an agent of change? Or do you resist change? As a CEO and COO, I frequently pose those questions to my subordinates, and then I follow with this parable. There are only two kinds of people in the world: those who make changes happen and those who watch changes happen. My question is which person are you? I think as you look at the title industry and the changes that are manifesting on your horizon, the question I have for you is this: which person are you? And if you are not an agent of change, find someone who is and leverage their energy and their drive to change in a constructive direction that helps you and helps your industry. Otherwise, you can watch others drive your industry and your destiny. Let me leave you with a couple final thoughts before we get to questions when it really gets fun. Change is inevitable. Change is natural. It's either evolutionary or revolutionary. Change can be good if you're driving it, but conversely, not so good if you're watching someone else drive it for you. Change is essential to growth. Remember my hypothesis. And only two of you raised your hands when I asked that question. If you do not embrace, accept, or evolve with change, you will rapidly become obsolete. Once you become obsolete, you will then become irrelevant. And when you become irrelevant, you will cease to function, and then you will cease to exist. As a young captain, I resisted the notion of change. I was comfortable with where I was, and I couldn't see the efficacy or the necessity of the change that was presented to me. Had I not adjusted my perspective and my mindset on change, I would have left the Army as a captain after only a handful of years. But I did adapt, and I did adjust my attitude, and I embraced change, not for change's sake, but I embraced change as an agent of change. The net result was I left the Army after 40 years of service, and I left as a Major General, a driver of change in one of America's most important commands over a vital region of the world. Which person do you want to be? Now, I'm happy to take your questions. Yes, sir.
General Karl.
Yes, sir.
Describe the most impactful change that you were a part of, and where did the idea for that change come from? Then how was the change implemented?
I think if you go back to history, and I talked about the historical significance of the failures that had followed us, we realized that if we did not change, the essence of our institution was threatened. If we didn't adapt and change, we would become irrelevant. And we could not do what we were what we took a solemn oath to do, and that was to support and defend the Constitution and to defend the people of the United States. If you cannot accomplish your mission, you're irrelevant. And so it took some very smart guys. General Gordon Sullivan was one of the agents of change. I had the privilege of being his aide-de-camp for nearly 2 years. And so I sat literally at the feet of the master who changed an institution to make it relevant and to make it the formidable fighting force that it is. And so changing your organization, changing your mission, changing your education processes and plans, and most importantly, integrating and leverage technology into that is what made the huge difference.
Chris Black did ask a question on Twitter and wanted to know what that ruler-looking thing was.
I'm sorry? The ruler-looking thing?
Answer it, Chris Black.
Okay. Okay, if someone would like to touch the ruler-looking thing, I can give you a real quick class on how that baby works.
Other questions? Does anybody want to be daring? Okay.
I don't really have a question, but I have a comment.
Yeah.
Just listening to you talk today brought back so many memories in my life, as well as I know a lot of people in this room that were alive back then.
Scary, isn't it?
It is very scary. And I just want to thank you for everything that you've done for this country to make us safe.
Oh, thank you. Let me say thank you to all of you, because without the support and consent of the American people, we could not do what we do. And so in 1973 and 1975, when we were reviled and scorned and spit on, it made it real hard for us to do our job because the American people didn't appreciate us. The fact that the American people stand by us, support us, and hold us in high regard allows us to continue to do the hard things that we do. And that's what keeps these young men and women going, knowing that what they do is important and that they do it with the support and the consent of the American people. And we should never, ever go back to those dark days of 1973, 4, 5, and we need to hold where we're at right now. And I'll just offer to you, you may not like the policies that go on, and many of us disagree with them. But the young men and women who execute those policies don't set those policies, okay? So those young men and women deserve your support, regardless of the crazy and insane things that seem to come out of Washington on a more frequent basis. The young men and women deserve our support and our respect. So thank you for that. And so to you, I say thank you very much.
General, when one of the visits you gave us a briefing about the Middle East,
yeah,
and I know you're retired, which means maybe you could say things that you couldn't say then. Can you give us a 2-minute update on your concerns specifically around Syria?
Yeah, well, I was pretty candid with that one too, and that's because I was on short file to retire, and so what Vince is referring to is Senator Rubio came to Tampa, and he wanted to come to CENTCOM, and he wanted to talk to CENTCOM about Syria, and so I said, well, that's great, but the commander is gone. He's in the AOR. And the deputy is gone. He's in Washington. And the only guy at CENTCOM that is here is me. And you know, I'm a poor third choice to talk about Syria. And he said, no, I'm in Tampa, and I want to talk about Syria. So I had the privilege of spending about 2.5 hours with the young senator. And he came in with a mindset that we should bomb Syria, that we should arm the opposition, that we should do something in Syria. And when we left, when we parted ways after 2 hours, his mind was significantly changed. And what I told him was, and he said, why shouldn't we bomb Syria? And I said, why should we bomb Syria? He said, but there's 100,000 Syrians who've been killed. I said, who cares? And he flinched. He said, geez, General, that's a pretty harsh assessment of human life. I said, listen, I can build an argument that nobody cares. All you have to do is go to the United Nations and look at those 2 standing vetoes in the Security Council and prove me wrong that the international community doesn't care about 100,000 Syrians. He said, well, we have to do something. I said, why? I said, this is Sunni and Shia Islam killing each other. This is ethno-sectarian violence, and all they want is some proxies to come in and fight their fight for them. Why on earth, Senator, would you put American men and women in between warring ethnocentric factions? It's crazy. He was a bit blown back because he took me for a guy that favored warheads on foreheads. Okay? I'm not. We senior guys that have been around for a long time, that came out of Vietnam and have done all these things, we are not warheads on foreheads kind of guys. We are first and foremost guys that seek peaceful solutions. So what I told Senator Rubio was, I said, Senator, I said, you really don't need to be in Tampa talking to little old me. You should have gone north to the United Nations and talked to them. If you want change, change happens diplomatically and economically in the United Nations, not in Tampa at CENTCOM. I said, when you come to me, that's because the guys and gals in New York, diplomatically, informationally, and economically, have failed to accomplish the mission. We're the last resort, not the first resort. Tell the guys in Washington we're not the first resort. And so it was kind of interesting, and we parted, we had pretty rambunctious discussion, but at the end of the day, he said, okay, General, what would you do? I said, nothing. Let it go. Let the Arab League handle it. Let the Arabs and the Middle East handle their problem. Let the Muslims handle their problem between Sunni and Shia Islam. It is not a Judeo-Christian fight. It is not our fight. Let it go. And so, fortunately, the leader of the free world was outmaneuvered by the old new president of Russia, and they came up with a semblance of a diplomatic solution that averted violence. Now, if any of you believe that it's really going to come to fruition, stay tuned. But the bottom line is we did not commit our national treasure, the blood and sacrifice of American men and women in uniform, and the national treasure, the billions of dollars that it would have taken to do that. We didn't commit that to Syria, and Syria will get on its own. And frankly, I believe that Syria is an Arab problem, and I believe Syria is an Islamic problem, and we are neither Arab nor Islamic, so let them solve it.
On Afghanistan, I got a feeling that you had made a comment you were going to revisit on the withdrawal. Did I?
No, I said I'd visit it in the questions. Because if I said I'd come back to it in questions, and let me just tell you, and I'll set the stage by giving you my perspective on Iraq. There was a time in my life when I was an Iraq optimist. I was optimistic that we would in fact effect change after 4,887 killed in action and $700 billion. I thought there was a chance that we could make a difference for Iraq. Unfortunately, we failed to secure a security agreement with the Iraqi government. Actually, the Iraqi government didn't want a security agreement because they knew that that would force us out of the country, and it would allow the president or the prime minister of Iraq to do what he was going to do anyway, which was kill Sunnis. And so we left Iraq, and it took exactly 3 days for Nouri al-Maliki to reverse the direction that we were going, and you now find that Iraq is in a terrible state away. It's back to the violence levels of 2007, 2008. Maliki came pandering to Washington, asking for us to come and help him with a fight, to which I said, we could have helped you in 2011 and you didn't let us. So I'm not optimistic there. We are on the same glide path in Afghanistan, ladies and gentlemen. We are faced with a decision on a bilateral security agreement that would give protection to American men and women in uniform in Afghanistan, trying to make a difference for them. The current leader of the Afghan government isn't interested in a bilateral security agreement because he'd really like us to just get on out of there. And so I will tell you that Afghanistan is on a reversible slippery slope, going the same direction that Iraq did, and I predict that Afghanistan will end up just like Iraq, and it will be for naught. And with the real travesty and tragedy of that are the Gold Star families, the mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, wives, that lost loved ones in these 2 fights, and the question that they ask is why? Why? And the answer is really tough, but you just needed to let us finish what we were doing and don't put constraints on us. And that's exactly what happened in Iraq, and that's exactly what's happening in Afghanistan. And so, you know, I'm very candid with you, and that's my assessment. And frankly, I didn't like the direction things were going, and as I told one gentleman here, he asked me, he said, "Why'd you retire?" I said, well, listen, when you get to be an old guy like me, when you're guys that lead change and are leaders, you have an obligation to follow the orders of your bosses and to embrace the policies and direction they want to go. And I found that it was difficult to do that. If you cannot support your boss, you have two choices. You either change the way you think or you leave. I retired.
Compare what happened in Vietnam or in other wars we haven't been successful with wars we have been successful in terms of defining the mission, the objective of the battle, and maybe relate that back to business and how we should be focused on, figure out what our mission is and focus on it.
Yeah, I'm gonna quote Jim Madison. He called it the Einstein 59-minute rule. If you have 1 hour, 60 minutes, you should spend 59 minutes defining the problem. 59 minutes defining the problem and 1 minute defining the solution. The biggest problem that people are faced with in Washington, in the military, in business is defining the problem. What's the problem? Too frequently, we find ourselves solving the wrong problem. Okay? So I would tell you, we had a hard time defining the problem. Okay? Vietnam changed beneath our feet. What started out in 1961 and 62 and 63 under the leadership of President John F. Kennedy changed by the time it got to Lyndon Baines Johnson and Richard Nixon. Okay? It changed. What was the problem we were trying to solve? It's been the same thing in Iraq. What's the problem we were trying to solve? We were ousting Saddam. We ousted Saddam, and guess what happened? Something else showed up. This raging ethno-sectarian insurgency. Okay, we didn't plan for that one. That wasn't a problem we were prepared to solve, but it was a problem we were faced with. And so I would tell you the most important thing that I've learned, and I think the most important thing for you in business is define the problem that you're trying to solve, and then develop a solution for it. Because if you solve the wrong problems, you're spending time, energy, resources, and you're not moving forward. Sir.
I wondered if you're familiar with David Marquette's work, retired Navy captain who wrote "Turn the Ship Around," that book.
Remember I told you about Navy guys.
I know. So if not, I saw him speak a little while ago, and his theory was he turned a really poor performing ship around by essentially empowering subordinates to make decisions which would have otherwise been forced to have been made by the captain.
Yeah.
Right. And I wondered if you had any experience with that in your.
Yeah, it's a power down strategy. In fact, it comes from a German military strategist, Helmut von Moltke, and in German the word is Auftragstaktik. It translates in English roughly to mission command, mission type orders. And what it entails is if you define for your subordinates what the mission is, what they are responsible for doing, and why it's important, and how their actions contribute to the greater good of the organization, they will work much harder for you. Kind of my example of change with Goldwater Nichols. I didn't intellectually understand what Goldwater Nichols was trying to accomplish. But once I had the opportunity to study it, once I had it explained to me with my heels together and the thumbs behind the seams of my trousers, I came to understand what was to be accomplished. So really, if people understand and people are empowered, if you give them your intent as a leader, this is what I would like you to do. This is why it's important. This is how you contribute to it. This is what I want it to look like at the end, and then you empower them to make those decisions. Okay? That's Auftragstaktik. So it's just, it's a common theme throughout the military. My last boss was a master at it. I have for many years been an Auftragstaktik kind of guy. A little German heritage in me, and command of the German language helped me understand it a little better. But but that's what it is, yeah. And I'll just tell you, it's a very solid philosophy. So if you empower your subordinates, and they know what you want to accomplish, and then you give them the latitude to act on your best behalf, the freedom of movement. Key in that is when they are successful and they do well, you hoist them up the yardarm and you heap praise upon them. When they don't do so well, then you, the leader, are responsible because you failed to give them adequate guidance and that autonomy they needed to accomplish the mission. So successes go to the youngsters that are doing the hard work out there. Failure belongs to you and me, the old guys in charge. And you're not an old guy.
Frank has our last question here in the front.
General, I want to go back to your hypothesis.
Yep.
And Microsoft's not so bad, but it's not the cutting edge anymore.
That's right.
The U.S. military is by far the cutting edge.
Yep.
How do we keep it at the cutting edge, and where might there be somebody out there that might challenge that?
I would tell you that the budget challenges that we are faced with right now, what's happening in Washington with inaction by our Congress and action by this administration, has the ability to do something to us that no other fighting force has been able to do, and that is bring us to our knees. Bring us to our knees. You cannot operate a business on a fixed income. You cannot operate a business on a continuing resolution. For those of you that are in business, you look at the continuing resolution, you go, are you kidding me? Look, we haven't had a budget in 4 years. We haven't had a budget in 4 years. We've been working off of continuing resolution, which caps spending at the previous year. And so if you want to modernize your fleet, if you want to educate the men and women that serve you, it takes resources to do that. And you start gutting the programs that educate, that intellectually stimulate these young men and women. If you gut the programs that give them that cutting edge technology with equipment and all that, you're doomed to failure. Okay? So I got to tell you, this budget conundrum that we find ourselves in is, I can say this now because I'm retired, is just shameful. Shame on all of them. Every one of them. And all they did with this last thing was drag us all through the mud and kick the can down the road for 2 months. We're going right back in 2 more months to go through this again. We haven't moved forward. Okay? I got to tell you a funny story. When I retired, I had to declare my state of residency. When I was a military guy, I could live wherever I wanted to and be whoever I wanted to be and whatever. So I went to the FLO, the Florida License on Wheels, and I got my Florida driver's license. And the clerk working in the FLO van asked me a question no one's ever asked me before. Mr. Horst, what political party are you affiliated with? No one's ever asked me that before. Because as an officer, I was apolitical by my oath. My oath was to support and defend the Constitution and to obey the orders of the President and my bosses. But this guy asked me who I was affiliated with. So, being the sarcastic guy that I am, I said, I don't like any of them. In fact, I'm madder. In fact, I'm mad as hell at all of them. So, Yeah, it's money. It's resources. You can't run a business without money. You can't run a business without a budget. And if you cut that down the way, it's going to have an effect. And so people who are spending more money, people who are willing to invest in people and technology will come close. There are several we call near-peer competitors. They're out there. They're on the horizon. They're closing the gap rapidly simply because they're willing to put the capital behind the improvements and we're not. So. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.